support you today. So, like I mentioned, my name is Haley. I've been a registered nurse for 10 years now, and I started my nursing career in pediatric surgery. So, that means that I took care of babies to teenagers, after they had surgery or an operation for anything. So things like heart surgery, or if they had a broken bone and needed surgery, or their tonsils out, or things like appendicitis, just about anything. So I took care of those kids after having surgery, and help them get better to go home and kind of move on at being well. So that's how I started my career. And then I moved into taking care of children and adults with kidney disease. So that looked like working in dialysis. So that's where somebody whose kidneys don't function properly, they have this treatment that kind of does the job of their kidneys and helps them stay well. So I did that for a number of years, and then I moved into clinical research trials, and that's my kind of my most recent job as a nurse. So I work with families who are enrolled in research trials for various things. So it may be for medications, it may be for other things, just kind of following along with genetic things or that sort of stuff. So I work with families to kind of, when they're looking for new treatments or new medications for things, to help them with that and help them to be well and improve on illness and disease. So that's what I've been doing as a nurse for the past 10 years. And my biggest job, though, is being a mom. So I'm a mom to two boys. I have a 2-year-old Charlie and a 7-month-old Eric, and they're my biggest job. So when Charlie was born, he's 2 now, but when he was born, I didn't know about the Baby Academy, and so I didn't have this baby sleep class. And even though I was a nurse, I didn't know a lot about baby sleep. I knew sleep was important, but so we kind of just went with the flow of things. And he was okay at the beginning. And then around 4 or 5 months, he started not sleeping very well. And he was really waking up a lot in the night, like every hour. And he was a fussy baby. And, my husband and I were exhausted. And so I thought, okay, we need to do something about this. So I started reading, and I got the help of a sleep consultant, and we got Charlie sleeping much better. He was a much happier baby, and as a family, we all felt much better. So that was really, really helpful for us. And as I started reading more about the science of baby sleep and how complex it is, I thought I became very, very passionate and very interested in it. So I decided that I would further my education. I took extensive training to become a sleep consultant and combined that with my training as a nurse. So I think the combination of the two for me goes really, really well, like hand in hand, because baby sleep is complex. It's not, it can be sometimes very tricky to figure out. So my background as a nurse and understanding, kind of the more medical side of things, and when babies are struggling with things like reflux and gas and all of those sort of things, that can all impact sleep. And so having and feeding and all of that comes together. It's a big whole picture. And so all of that has to work together to help babies sleep and get adequate sleep. So, I love combining my education as a nurse and my education as a sleep consultant to work with families who are needing help with sleep to help them help their baby get better sleep. And so that can look like one phone call with a family. That can look like a 2-week process working with a family, or sometimes I work with families for several months if they're really needing that support. So that's what I do now, along with my taking care of my 2 boys. So that's a little bit about me. I use, when I work with families, I'm using my nursing education, my sleep consulting education, and really focusing on research and evidence-based practices to make sure that, we're doing proper assessments and setting goals and evaluating, what's working, what's not, and really helping each individual family to make them feel like things are improving and things are getting better, and everybody's feeling more rested. So that's a bit about me. Now I want to hear a bit more about you. So the chat's turned on. So let's, you can let me know your name, where you're from, when your baby's due, or if you already have your baby with you, how old are they? So you can just let me know in the chat. And I want to welcome everybody, but I'll do a few shout outs in the meantime. So we've got June from Vancouver, September 7th, very soon. We've got Erica from Red Deer, baby is 9 weeks. We've got Courtney from Medicine Hat, Alberta, September 17th, very soon. Heather from Edmonton, October 25th. Congratulations. We've got Denise from Vancouver, due in December. Wow, lots and lots of people. We've got Emily from Vancouver, has a baby that's 4 months old. So we've got people here who are expecting babies, and we've got people here who already have their baby with them. So you can sit back, relax, and take in all the information that you can. And I'm hoping to make you all feel much more confident about baby sleep. So today's game plan, these are the things we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about understanding how sleep impacts your baby's development. How much sleep does my baby need? Signs that baby is sleepy. We're going to talk about daytime nap versus nighttime routine, common sleep challenges and how to overcome them. And we're going to talk about the 4-month sleep regression. So lots and lots of great information here. So we're going to talk first about understanding how sleep impacts your baby's development. So sleep can influence your baby in many different ways. So first, we'll talk about the strength of your baby's immune system. So when we sleep, adults to babies, everybody, our bodies release proteins that help to build up our immune system and prevent us from getting sick. So it's important that your baby gets an adequate amount of sleep and gets enough sleep so that their bodies can kind of produce and release these proteins, which helps build up their immune system. So if they're not sleeping as much, there's not as much opportunities for these kind of protective proteins to be released. And then it can be a bit harder for their immune system to build up. So sleep influences your baby's ability to process emotions. So if you think about yourself, if you're sleep deprived, it might not feel as easy to be happy. So you might feel more irritated, less patient, those sorts of things. So it's having adequate sleep for your baby. It does help their ability to process emotions. So if they're very sleep deprived for long periods of time, they might be more fussy. They might not want to, it might be harder to get them to play and engage and that sort of thing. Your baby's ability to learn skills. So and not having adequate sleep can hinder their ability to learn new skills. So, for example, there's some research that shows that, sleep-deprived infants may struggle with language development when they're toddlers. So, this isn't to say that, like, if your baby's having small periods of time where they're not sleeping well, that they're going to struggle with language development. But if it goes on for long periods of time that your baby's not getting adequate sleep, this can begin to influence learning skills down the road. Your baby's behavior. So similar to processing emotions, if your baby is not getting enough sleep, they're more likely to be fussy, cranky, not as content, wanting to play, that sort of thing. So your baby's behavior can absolutely be influenced by not getting enough sleep. Your baby's ability to grow. So our babies grow a lot in the first year of their life. So a lot of this growth happens when they're sleeping. So it's really important that they get adequate sleep in order to help them grow. And then how your baby stores memories. So having more sleep actually helps your baby, their ability to store memories and to recall things. So there's some research out there that shows that babies who have, adequate sleep and really good sleep are more likely to be able to recall things, more into further into their childhood. So sleep is very important for babies, and it can feel like a struggle sometimes. I know, I've been there twice. It can be really hard. So the more kind of information you have and the more you can be aware of things that you can do to help, can really help make it a less of a struggle. So did you know that poor sleep in infancy has been linked to problems with cognitive performance, social skills, and obesity? So some of the things I talked about above. Now, as I mentioned, this is not to say that if your baby is having periods of time where they're struggling with sleep, often there are times where they're taking short naps, you're having a hard time getting them to sleep at bedtime, that sort of thing. This does not mean that all these, that their immune system's not going to develop and that they're going to be, they're not going to learn to talk. And so this is not meant to scare you. It's just more so meant for you to be aware that there are many, many benefits of healthy sleep. And so doing what you can to make sure that your baby gets healthy sleep is super, super beneficial to them. So I want to talk about how much sleep does my baby need. And so I'm going to reference some numbers. But before I do that, I just want to go over a couple of terms with you. So you may hear me talk about something called sleep cycles. So a sleep cycle. So when we sleep as adults and babies, we go through cycles of sleep. So a newborn sleep cycle only has 2 stages. So it's more like a deep sleep and an active sleep. Okay. And they cycle through. Once they get around 4 months, their sleep cycles change to be more similar of an adult. And in that sleep cycle, there are 4 stages. So they're in lighter stages of sleep, something called rapid eye movement, and they get into deeper stages of sleep, and then they get into a lighter stage of sleep before transitioning to a new cycle. So I'm not going to get too scientific on you, but that's kind of that's what a sleep cycle means. So they go through, overnight, they go through many sleep cycles. For a nap, they go through only a few because naps are shorter. So that's what a sleep cycle is. And then the other term I may use sometimes through the class is called sleep pressure. And so sleep pressure, if you think of it as your baby kind of building the feeling of being tired. So I like to kind of use the example of comparing it to a cup and filling it with water. So when your baby wakes up in the morning, for example, they wake up and they're feeling rested. And then similar to a cup, the cup would be empty. And as they're awake, during their awake time, while they're, feeding and playing and that sort of thing, they are building this tiredness. So the cup, think of it as filling with water. And so your baby is filling with this tired feeling. And so what happens is we want to build the tiredness or fill the cup of water to the top. We don't want it to be overflowing. So what happens is if the cup is overflowing or if your baby is overflowing with tiredness, they're overtired. And what happens is they can get really overtired and it can make sleep very difficult. So we want to, I'm going to talk about numbers and wake windows and that sort of thing. And so we just want to keep an eye that they're not getting overtired when we try to get them to sleep. On the other side, we want to make sure that they're tired enough. So if you think back to that cup, if the cup is only just a little bit full of water, so if your baby is only a little bit tired but not tired enough, it might also be really hard for them to sleep. So think about, for example, for yourself, if when you wake up in the morning, if you tried, maybe think back to before having a baby when maybe you weren't tired, but when you first wake up, if a couple hours later someone told you should try to take a nap, you probably wouldn't be able to because you haven't gone through your day, exerting energy and building that feeling of being tired so you sleep overnight. It's the same for your baby. So if they've not been awake long enough and you're trying to get them to sleep, it will be very hard for them to sleep because they're just not tired enough. So those are the terms, the sleep cycles and the sleep pressure you may hear me talk about, and that's what I'm referring to. So let's talk about some numbers here. So remember, you're going to be emailed these slides, so you'll be able to reference this. So these are sleep expectations for different month ranges. So let's first talk about how much sleep your baby needs in 24 hours. So for 0 to 1 months, we're looking at around 15 to 18 hours. And this is in a 24-hour period. So as you probably know, babies' tummies are very small and they need frequent feedings, okay? So just because they need 15 to 18 hours, it's not going to be all at once. So it's going to be broken up into naps during the day and then sleeping overnight. And babies at this age they'll wake for feedings overnight, and that's very normal. So it's a total amount of 15 to 18 hours, but there are awake times in there, okay? From 1 to 2 months, 14 to 18 hours. From 2 to 3 months, 14 to 17 hours. So you can see the sleep needs are getting a bit less here. From 3 to 4 months, 12 to 15 hours. So, quite a bit less at this age. And then 4 to 5 months, 12 to 14 hours in a 24-hour period. So as your baby grows, they're able to stay awake longer. And so then their periods of sleep don't necessarily become shorter, but maybe they were taking 6 naps and now they only need 4, for example. So as they get bigger, the amount of sleep they need decreases, okay? And once they're at kind of the 12 to 14 hour range, around the 4 to 5 months, most babies and most toddlers still need around that amount of sleep, 12 to 14 hours, until they're at least like around 3.5, and looking at dropping their nap. Then their sleep needs decrease a little bit, but the 12 to 14 hours goes for quite a long time. So let's talk about length of naps. So 45 to 90 minutes for 0 to 1 month old. And length of naps can really vary. So that's why there's a range here. So your baby might nap for 45 minutes. Some babies only nap for like 20 or 25 minutes. And this is very normal at this age. And sometimes they might nap for an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes 2.5 hours. It really depends on your baby. Some babies always nap for a long time. Some babies always take shorter naps. Some babies will take a short nap and then a long nap, a short nap and then a long nap. It depends on your baby and the environment and that sort of thing. At 1 to 2 months, 45 to 90 minutes. So same kind of range there. At 2 to 3 months, 45 to 90 minutes. And sometimes around 3 months, you may start to notice, for example, if your newborn was taking like 2-hour naps, you might notice around 2 to 3 months, their naps might become a bit shorter. Become a bit more aware at this age and more stimulated. And sometimes nap time becomes a little bit harder. So naps can be shorter. Sometimes people will refer to them as like the 3-month cat naps. So they can be a little bit shorter, and that's normal, totally normal. If they're short naps, they may just take more of them. And that's okay. Around 3 to 4 months, still 45 to 90 minutes is normal. And around this age, again, often naps are shorter than 2 hours. Some babies will take a 2-hour nap at this age. It depends on the baby, but there's a big range there, and it's normal. Around 4 to 5 months, 75 to 120 minutes. So around this age, naps, and I'll talk about this in a second, they'll start to kind of decrease a bit, the number of naps. And so often the naps will get a bit longer. And it's very normal, though, for naps still to be short around this 4 to 5 month mark. Usually around 6 to 7 months, you'll see naps become a bit longer and a bit more predictable. So more kind of the same every day. So as your baby gets bigger, things will become a bit more predictable. So let's talk about a wake window. So a wake window is the amount of time that so for example, when they wake up in the morning, the time they're awake until they go down for their nap. And then they have their nap. And then the next awake window is the time they're awake from their first nap to the time that they're going down for their second nap. So that awake window is the awake time between the naps and then between the last nap and bedtime. So for 1 to 2 months, the wake window is very short, so 30 to 90 minutes. And so your brand new baby likely will not be able to stay awake for an hour and a half, but more so probably around the 30 to 60 minute mark. Once they get around 1 to 2 months, 60 to 90 minutes. So typically they can stay awake for an hour. And before bed, they may be able to stay awake a little longer than an hour. So typically what happens with awake windows is as in the morning is the shortest. And then as the day goes on, the wake windows can lengthen, even if it's by like 2 or 3 minutes. But usually between the last nap and bedtime, baby can stay awake slightly longer, depending on the baby. And then at 2 to 3 months, a wake window is around 60 to 120 minutes. And then 3 to 4 months, 60 to 120 minutes. And then 4 to 5 months, an hour and a half to 2 hours. So typically by 5 months, your baby should be able to stay awake for at least 2 hours. Again, varies from baby to baby. It might be a little less, it might be a little more, but typically around an hour and a half to 2 hours by that age. So in terms of number of daytime naps, from 0 to 1 month, 3 to 6 naps. So again, it depends how long are the naps. Because if they're really long, you might have fewer naps during the day. If they're really short, then you might have more. 1 to 2 months, 4 to 6 naps. 2 to 3 months, 3 to 5 naps. 3 to 4 months, 3 to 4 naps. And 4 to 5 months is 3 to 4 naps. So as you can see, as your baby gets older, they nap less. So what happens is they're able to stay awake longer, and so they don't need as many naps to get them from morning to bedtime. Okay, so typically once your baby's around 5 months, they're taking around 3 naps a day. And if they're short, if they have short naps, they may require a fourth nap. But it just depends. It depends on your baby and how long their naps are. Approximate bedtimes. So bedtime is late for your newborn, okay? So for the first 3 months, it's usually pretty late. So 0 to 1 month, it's 9 p.m., 1 to 2 months, 9 p.m., 2 to 3 months, 7 to 9. So for the first 3 months, bedtime is late, and it may even be later than 9. Some babies do well with a 10 or 11 p.m. bedtime. And often, it works well like this because you do your last feed and then your baby kind of goes to bed around the same time as you, and you might get a longer stretch of sleep because you've done that last feeding late. Whereas if you feed your baby and put them to bed at 7 when they're like a month old, they're probably going to wake at 9 for a feeding, and it's hard at that age for them to distinguish daytime and nighttime. Like they don't really know because they haven't developed that circadian rhythm yet. So bedtime is late for the last feed, and then they try to get a longer stretch of, like, a 2 to 3 hour stretch of sleep before the next feeding. At 2 to 3 months, bedtime starts to move earlier, so between 7 and 9, depending on your baby. And then at 3 to 4 months and 4 to 5 months, bedtime is generally between 6 and 8 p.m. So this is the sweet spot for the majority of babies, between 6 and 8 p.m., when they will fall asleep easiest and stay asleep the longest, okay? So what happens is if you kind of look at the day as like a 12-hour day and a 12-hour night. So of course, baby's not going to be sleeping 12 hours overnight. They're going to still need feeds. But if you look at it as two separate blocks, if they're going to wake to sleep between 6 and 8 in the evening, their natural time to wake is between 6 and 8 in the morning. So we want to make sure they're getting that nice stretch of sleep overnight, even with feeds. And so the morning wake is around 6 to 8 a.m. So we want bedtime to be 6 to 8 p.m. Nighttime wakings. So from 0 to 1 month, they're waking often. Okay. This is normal. Their tummies are small and they need to feed often. Okay. So every 2 to 3 hours is normal. 1 to 2 months, 2 to 4 times a night. 2 to 3 months, 2 to 3 times a night. 3 to 4 months, 2 to 3 times a night. And by 4 to 5 months, some babies take only one feed, sometimes a couple of feeds. And you may see online somebody saying my 3-month-old sleeps 10 hours at night without a feed. Your friends may tell you, their baby's doing this or that, and they're having nice long stretches. It happens. Some babies do, once they get to be about 3 months, start to sleep longer stretches. But it's also normal for babies to still wake multiple times a night for feeds at this age. Still between like 3 and 6 months, it's still really normal. Around 6 months, it's still normal to be waking for one feed, sometimes for the first year. Some babies don't need a feed after 6 months, but it really depends on your baby and how much they're taking during the day for milk. And so I guess my point here is try not to look at what's happening with other babies and compare yourself, because it can get kind of frustrating and wondering, why isn't my baby doing this or that? So these are normal times for babies to wake at these ages. And then the longest stretch of nighttime sleep, so 0 to 1 months, 2 to 4 hours. So in those first weeks, often it's normal for them to wake every 2 hours. Sometimes you can get a 3 hour stretch, but 2 to 4 hours for sure. 1 to 2 months, 3 to 5 hours. So around 2 months, you might start to get a bit, sleep might get a little bit longer. 2 to 3 months, 3 to 6 hours, 3 to 4 months, 3 to 6 hours, and 4 to 5 months, 3 to 8 hours. So by 5 months, your baby may be able to sleep longer stretches without waking. Having said that, if they are waking every 3 hours needing a feed, it can still be normal, depending on your baby. The thing to kind of focus on is making sure to follow your baby's hunger cues during the day and make sure they're getting lots of calories during the day. So feedings every 2 to 3 hours for most babies, sometimes 3.5 hours, depends on the baby, but usually every 2 to 3 hours. And if they can get a lot of their calories in during the day, you are more likely to get longer stretches of sleep overnight without them becoming hungry so frequently, like once they get into that 3 to 5 month age range. So sleeping times can vary between babies, as I said, especially within the first 4 months. So try not to compare your baby to other babies. These times and the amount of times they're waking here in this chart are normal, okay? So let's talk about signs that baby is sleepy. So this is really important. It's important to know these signs so we can get our babies sleeping before they hit that overtired area where it gets really hard for them to fall asleep and to stay asleep. So signs that your baby is sleepy. Apart from the obvious sign of yawning, things you want to look out for are rubbing of the ears. So you'll sometimes notice your baby's rubbing their ears. It seems like they're kind of at the end of their wake window, like we talked about on the previous slide. So rubbing ears, yes, can be a sign of pain or ear infection, but often in young babies, it's a sign that they're tired. So if it's ear rubbing in the absence of other symptoms and it's happening at the end of the wake window, it's likely because they're tired. Appearing disinterested. So maybe you've got them on a little play mat and they're kind of gazing at some toys, or if they're a bit older, they're grabbing at them. And then you suddenly know that they're kind of staring off, or maybe they're a very little baby and you're just holding them and you're kind of chatting with them and they're looking at you and they seem to be really focused on you. And then all of a sudden they just start to stare off into one spot. This is starting to, seem like they're disinterested and is a sign that they're getting tired. And then another really big one is right around the eyes and the eyebrows. So you'll notice at the end of your baby's wake window or when they're getting tired, they'll start to have this pink hue around their eyes and around their eyebrows. And that is a very telltale sign that they're tired and they're ready for a nap. So some babies have sleepy signs that are unique to them. So you need to watch your baby because you might find some of these. And so just watch them and learn what they are. So I'll give you an example. When my 7-month-old, he doesn't do this as much now, but when he was a newborn, around the end of his wake window, he didn't really yawn that much. And I often noticed him chewing on his fingers. And so I always tried to feed him because that's a very telltale hunger sign, right? Chewing on the fingers. And so I tried to feed him and I had fed him not long ago. And so he seemed uninterested in feeding. And it kept happening and happening. And it was always at the end of the wake window. And so this was his sign that he was tired. And so after I started noticing doing it often, I was like, oh, this is a kind of a unique sleepy sign to him. So not all babies will do that, but something that he did that was kind of different. So watch your baby, see if you can notice things that they're doing at the end of their awake time that signal to you early on that they're tired. So the following cues suggest that babies should have gone to sleep a little sooner. So they're getting fussy, they're crying. So of course babies can the crying can be used, it's their way of communicating. So they may cry because they're hungry or cry because they want something. Crying doesn't always mean they're tired, but if they're late in that awake window and they're being really fussy and starting to cry, this is a sign that they're probably getting very overtired. Their eyes drooping, so you might start to notice them nod off, and rubbing their eyes. So if you notice like a quick eye rub, and it's just the end of the wake window, that's fine. That's great. That's a sleepy sign. Put them down for a nap. But if you're at the end of the wake window and they're like aggressively rubbing their eyes and they're getting really fussy, this is a sign that they're getting overtired. So, when we start to see those things, maybe for the next nap, we want to try putting them down for their nap a little bit earlier to avoid getting to these overtired signs. Okay, so let's talk now about safe sleep. So I want to talk about something called SIDS. So it's sudden infant death syndrome. And it can sound a bit scary, but it's a really good thing to talk about and to know about. So reducing the risk of SIDS. So since the launch of the Back to Sleep campaign in 1991, the number of SIDS death has fallen by 82%. So SIDS means a sudden infant death in a child under the age of 1. And it's most common in, from newborn to 4 months. And then the risk kind of decreases from there. But since the Back to Sleep campaign was launched, we've seen SIDS death fall by 82%, which is huge. So we know that putting our baby to sleep on their back is the safest way for your baby to sleep. So let's start with the ABCs of safe sleep. So babies should sleep alone, on their back, in a crib or bassinet in your room, okay? Ensure the crib isn't beside blinds. So cords on blinds are tempting for baby. It might not seem so in the newborn days, but quickly they'll become aware and they can start to grab for things. And so we don't want them beside any cords, not for blinds, not for baby monitors, that sort of thing. So keep them away of any cords. Use a one-piece sleeper. So a one-piece sleeper just looks like this. It's one piece. It's got little feet in it. You can also get them without feet too. So use a one-piece sleeper, a breathable blanket, no blanket, no pillows, and no bumper pads or teddies. So we don't want to use blankets. I'm going to show you what we can do instead of using blankets. Okay. No pillows, and the bumper pads that go around the rails of the crib are not safe. So even those mesh ones that you can still buy these, but they're not safe. So even the mesh ones that they claim are, breathable, and it's not safe to put any bumper pads in the crib. So don't use them. And it's okay to tell people that it's not safe to use those. So don't feel bad about it. It's okay to tell people it's not safe. And the risk of your baby being injured from their arm or leg going out between the slats of the crib or rolling and like bumping their head into the side of the crib is so low. The risk of using the bumper pads greatly outweighs the risk of your child getting hurt some way inside their crib, by rolling into it or sticking their arm outside. So no bumper pads, no teddies, crib sheet that fits tightly over the mattress. So just a fitted sheet over the crib mattress or over the mattress of the bassinet. And the gap in the slats of the crib shouldn't be wider than a can of Coke. And cribs have to pass safety regulations in Canada. So the slats should not be wider than a can of Coke. Like, you shouldn't run into that. But just so you know, they shouldn't be wider than a can of Coke. And one of the biggest things about safe baby sleep is not to fall asleep with your baby on the couch. So especially in the early days, it can be so easy to be holding your baby on your chest and they're sleeping and they're warm and they're comfortable. And then you start to feel really tired and you start to nod off. And this is really, really unsafe. It's very easy for you to get into kind of a deep sleep and for your baby to roll. And we definitely do not want that to happen. So don't fall asleep with your baby on the couch. If your baby's sleeping on you and you're on your couch, and you feel like you're going to fall asleep, either put your baby down, put them in their crib or their bassinet, or hand them off to somebody else if you've got somebody else there. But certainly don't fall asleep with your baby, holding your baby on the couch. Very, very unsafe. Okay, so I mentioned the blanket a second ago. So we're going to talk about safe swaddling, and this is kind of what you can do to make sure your baby feels safe and warm, instead of, putting loose blankets on them. So for safe swaddling, we use a light breathable blanket. And so this is just one of those like muslin cotton blankets. So it's very light, it's breathable. It's not a big heavy blanket. It's really light. So we use that type of blanket. We don't want it to be too tight. So it can be tight around the arms, but around the hips and the legs, we don't want it to be really tight to avoid any sort of hip damage while their little hips are growing. And then we want to keep baby's shoulders, head, and neck free. So if you're using a breathable blanket to do this, you want to make sure that it's down kind of at their shoulders and not near their neck or their head. And the biggest thing here is once your baby can roll, or once they're showing signs, so even if that means they're turning on their side, not completely rolling over, but if they're starting to roll onto their side, you can no longer swaddle. So this is for safety reasons. So if in the middle of the night when you're sleeping, if they try to roll and they successfully roll over, you don't want their hands to be swaddled in, because then it's very hard for them to control their head. They need to be able to have their arms free. So once your baby shows signs of rolling, stop swaddling. And for some babies, this happens as early as like 8 weeks. Usually it's in the first 3 months. But sometimes it can be in the first couple of months, like it can be really early for some babies. So just watch your baby, keep an eye on that. And I'm going to let you know what you can do once you can't swaddle anymore. So I'm going to do a little demonstration to show you how to swaddle your baby in the light breathable blanket. So I'm just going to adjust my screen a little bit so you guys can see. So you've got I'm just going to stand up so it's easier for you guys to see here. So you've got your light breathable blanket. And so what you're going to do is take one of the points on the blanket, and you're going to kind of fold it down part way. You don't need to fold it all the way, but part way. And then lie your blanket down on a flat surface. So this might be like the change table, or you could do it on your bed, something like that. And then you're going to take your baby and lie them down and make sure their shoulders are at the top of the blanket here. So you can see the blanket is down at the shoulders. And I'll just let you know that, so when you swaddle, you can leave baby's hands by their side, or you can tuck them up on their chest. And a lot of babies like their hands up on their chest. They find it more comfortable this way. So some babies don't mind like this. Sometimes if you swaddle with your baby's arms down like this, you'll see them try to inch them up like this. So in that case, it's easier if you just swaddle them with their arms kind of up on their chest, and they find that really comfortable. So you're going to put your baby's arms on their chest or by their side, and you're going to take one side of the blanket and wrap it across baby, okay? And make sure that it's down below their shoulders. You're going to tuck that side under their back, okay? And then you're going to take the bottom of the blanket and you're going to bring it up and tuck it into the top, just above their arms, into the top of the blanket. And then you take the other side of the blanket and you're going to wrap it around the top of baby and around their back. And this is a little swaddled baby Emily. So you can see the blanket is down around the shoulders, okay? It's not way up into her neck, so it's nowhere near her neck or her face. It's tight around here, but it's a bit looser down by the feet, so she's got room to move her feet around, okay? So this is swaddling with a light breathable blanket, okay? So the other thing that I want to show you that you can use is something, it's called a sleep sack. And this one in particular was gifted to me, and it's a really neat concept. So how this works is there are holes for the arms, but they snap together, okay? So when your baby is very young and needs to be swaddled, you can keep them closed. But when your baby is no longer able to be swaddled because they are bigger and they're starting to roll, you can open the holes and their arms will come out through the holes. So it's like a wearable blanket. And these are considered safe because they're on the baby and it's nothing loose that can come up over their face. So I'll just show you here. So I'm just going to take baby Emily out of this blanket and show you what you can do with this. So again, on a flat surface, lie her down. And then we're just going to tuck her arms in here. And you can see here's the hole where her arm would come out, but it's snapped together because she's a brand new baby. And then it's got a zipper on it, and you just zip it, and you zip right up to the top. And this one is a bit big for her, so it's a bit close to her face. So you want to make sure that you get one that's the right size, okay? So they come in all different sizes from newborn all the way to, like, my 2-year-old still wears one of these with his arms out. And it's like a wearable blanket. So make sure you're purchasing the right size if you decide you want one of these instead of the blanket. The blanket is safe and fine as long as it's wrapped like a swaddle. But if you want this option, just make sure that it's the right size and it's not too big, okay? So this, you can see her arms are snug in here, and then it's very loose at the bottom. There's nothing kind of restricting her hips. And then once she can roll, we can still use this, but we will allow her arms to be out. And so when you're putting this on your baby, you would have them lying down, putting their arms in it. But I'm just showing you here that you can, in this one particularly, you can open the holes and stick the arms out. Now I believe you can probably get this where it's just arms in and there's no option to take the arms out. And you can also get sleep sacks that the arms don't close and the arms are just out. So there are many, many different options. As long as it's the right size, then it's considered safe. So you can use that as well. That can be really, really helpful. I do really like this one because it's like a 2-for-1. You can use it for swaddling and then as a sleep sack. So you don't have to go, buying more and more things. So it's really great for that. And then the other thing with the sleep sack is it has something called TOG. So it's thermal overall grade. So there are different thicknesses of the sleep sack. So depending on how warm baby's room is, you're going to want to see, like, they come in 0.5, 1.0, 2.5. So the lower the number of TOG would be, the thinner the material. And then 2.5, for example, would be really thick. So if baby's room is colder, then you might want to use that. So if you're looking at it online or if you're looking at it in a store, there's usually a little chart attached and it will tell you if baby's room is this temperature, you should get this level of TOG. So size and making sure that it's warm enough or not too warm are both very important if you choose to use the sleep sack or that type of swaddle. Okay, so did you know an important part of developing healthy sleep habits for your baby includes teaching them to fall asleep on their own? So babies find it soothing to be rocked or cuddled, and this is important in the first few weeks. However, from approximately 6 weeks, it's best to put your baby to bed before they actually fall asleep. Allow those sleep cues and the wake windows that we talked about to guide you. So when you do this, they'll be less anxious if they wake up during the night and you are not there. So this in turn means that they're more likely to fall asleep without needing your help. So absolutely in the first few weeks, you may want to help your baby to sleep and then put them down. But a lot of people find that when you feed your baby to sleep or you rock them to sleep and then on the transfer and you set them down, boom, they wake up because they're all nice and cuddled and cozy in your arms. And then you do this transfer and you put them down and they're like, well, what just happened here? My environment totally changed. Or you put them down and they stay asleep, but then like an hour later they wake up and they're not hungry because they just had a feed like an hour ago. And so they're looking for you to help them back because they do this like environment change at, when that sleep cycle that I talked about, when they're coming to the top and trying to connect to a new cycle, they do this little check and they're like, oh, I'm not in the same place now. So, I need that, one of my parents to help me get back to sleep. And It's okay if to feed your baby to sleep or to rock your baby to sleep. And if you're okay getting up and helping them back to sleep multiple times a night, especially like as the months go on, that's okay. However, if it's starting to feel really too exhausting and unsustainable to be, at 6 months old, be getting up every couple of hours or every hour, which is what I was doing with my first baby, it's exhausting and it doesn't feel sustainable to a lot of people. We need to try to teach them to fall asleep on their own. And that will really, really help. If they do wake up when they transition those sleep cycles, they'll just go right back to sleep because they won't need that extra support from you because they're aware of their environment. They fell asleep in their crib, they popped up awake for a second, and they're like, oh, I'm in the same place. And so they go back to sleep. And so one thing I like to kind of compare this to is if you were asleep on your couch and you woke up on your neighbor's couch, you would be very, very scared and freaked out. So if your baby's falling asleep on you and then they're waking up in their sleep space in their crib or bassinet, they're scared. They're wondering, like, what happened to my parents? Where they go? I fell asleep nice and cozy on one of my parents, and now I'm in this crib. It doesn't mean that they hate their crib. A lot of people will say, oh, my baby hates their crib. My baby hates their bassinet. No, they're just not used to it. And that's okay. We can help them get used to it. So what you can try is following those awake times and the sleepy cues and putting them down awake. And yes, when they're very little, they still need help to sleep. Often, sometimes first nap of the day, they might be able to fall asleep on their own, even at a very young age. But often they'll still need your help. And so you can just put your hand on their chest. They know you're there. You can gently rock their body back and forth or tap their chest or their tummy. And this can help them nod off to sleep. And it can be very, very helpful because you're not doing that transfer. So they know they've fallen asleep lying down on their back in their sleep space. And so if they wake, they're familiar with their environment and they know, and then they just can drift back off and it becomes easier for them. So let's talk about some routines. So daytime naps versus nighttime routine. Okay. So some important information. Setting a consistent routine is without a doubt the most important tactic. So from 6 weeks onwards, ensure your baby gets plenty of daylight stimulation during the day to help develop a healthy circadian rhythm. So circadian rhythm is your baby developing the awareness to know the difference between daytime and nighttime. And that light, when it's light, it means it's daytime. And when it's dark, it means it's nighttime and it's time for longer sleeps. So while babies need several naps during the day, I suggest that you find a napping schedule that makes your baby tired enough to sleep well at night. So if you're letting your baby sleep for like 6 hours at a time during the day, two things. A, they're not getting enough to eat. And B, they're sleeping so long during the day, they're going to have more energy to be awake at night. So here's what we can do about this. So tips for the daytime routine that a lot of people aren't aware of. Baby should nap in a well-lit room. So in the early days when you have a newborn, it's great to let them sleep nap in your living room or a bright space. This helps because they cannot tell the difference between day and night. So this can help them differentiate between day and night by allowing them to nap in a bright space. Now, having said that, as they get a bit older, they likely will need the dark space to nap, sometimes around even a couple of months. So to keep that in mind. But in the very early days, like the first few weeks, definitely okay and great to let them nap in a bright space. Keep everything running as normal. So if you got a radio on or a TV on, or, there's noise in your house, it's okay. You don't need to make it totally silent. We don't want baby to have to rely on a completely silent space to sleep. So keep everything running as normal. If baby hasn't woken naturally after 3.5 hours, wake them for a feed. This will ensure they're more likely to sleep longer stretches at night. So a couple of things here. Your baby needs to eat usually every 2 to 3.5 hours. So we want to make sure we're waking for great calorie intake during the day. And we need to make sure they have enough awake time. Even as newborns, we need to make sure they have enough awake time during the day in order to give us those little bit of longer stretches of sleep at night. So Most babies will not nap for 3.5 hours. Some babies will. So we need to make sure that we're waking them to ensure they're getting a really good feed and to ensure they have a bit of a wake time so that they're not keeping you up all night simply because they're just not tired. So, tips for nighttime routine. So, before bed, feed baby in the same chair. So, once it's bedtime, you can, about half an hour, usually 40 minutes before their bedtime. So, if you think about those awake windows we talked about, after their last nap, think, okay, my baby's going to be awake now for an hour and a half. So after about an hour, we want to start getting them ready for bed. Or maybe your baby's 4 months old and they can be awake for 2 hours before bedtime. So around the hour and a half mark, we want to start the bedtime routine. So we want to feed them as part of this routine. So often I'll recommend they do a bath first. And then into pajamas and all of that. And then you can do a feed and feed them in the same place. So whether that's in your room or their room, just it's nice to keep it calm and consistent and feeding in the same place. Okay. Always put baby to sleep in the same room each night. So usually for the first 6 months, baby sleeps in parents' room. Okay. Sometimes some babies do better in their own room a bit before 6 months, and that's okay. So just make sure that consistently it's in the same place. So for example, what I mean by that is don't have your baby falling asleep in the living room and then just taking them to your room when you're going to bed. Try at their bedtime, putting them in their crib, or bassinet and allowing them to sleep there. And then when you're ready to go to bed, then you just go. Instead of letting them sleep in one place and transferring them to another, that sort of thing. So try to make sure they're going to sleep in the same room each night. You want a dark room at nighttime. So dimmed lights are optional, but not ideal. So usually at nighttime, dark is really preferable. Okay. So when I work with families who are struggling with sleep, typically I will recommend at nighttime, the room is so dark that if you close the door and hold your hand out, you can't see your hand. So very, very dark. And this really helps in the early days, helps baby differentiate daytime and nighttime. And that nighttime is dark, and the dark helps their bodies produce melatonin, which helps with sleep. And so this helps them sleep longer stretches at nighttime. So you can use a dim light. Some babies it doesn't affect so much, but usually it's stimulating to babies to use lights. So dark is best, especially for bedtime. You can play calming music. Now, again, this is optional. Some babies do really well with calming music. Some babies are too stimulated by it. So you just have to try with your baby and see. It's not something you have to do, but it's certainly something you can try. But again, sometimes some babies are too stimulated by it. And then after you do that feed as part of your routine, try singing a song or reading a short story kind of before they fall asleep. And that kind of breaks up the feed from the sleep and allows you the opportunity to let them fall asleep on their own. Of course, when they're very young, they may fall asleep while they're feeding, and that's okay. Around that 4-month mark, though, their sleep cycles change to more adult-like, and they sometimes really struggle with connecting them. So if they can fall asleep on their own in their crib or in their bassinet, it's very helpful for them to fall back asleep during the night without needing like hours of help from parents to get them back to sleep. So that story or the song can help kind of separate the feeding to sleep from going to bed, and make it really helpful to allow your baby to fall asleep more independently. And of course, when they're young, you can still, if they're crying, pick them up or, put them in their crib, and then again, hand on the chest, rocking back and forth, or pats on the belly, that sort of thing. All of those are very helpful ways to help your baby fall asleep without like fully holding them and then transferring them. Okay. And so once they're in there, a kiss goodnight kind of signals the end of the routine. And now it's time for sleep. So what's key here is that you do the same thing each night. So your baby will learn to associate this routine with going to sleep. So there's actually some evidence that shows that doing a bath I say every night, but not when they're a newborn. So newborns don't need a bath every night. But once they get into that like 4 or 5 month range, if you're doing a bath every night, over time, it signals to baby's brain, bath is the start of the routine, and that means it's time for the big sleep. So they're getting clean and comfortable, but it's also a signal to them that it's time for bedtime and it's time for my long sleep. So it's very, very helpful to do the same thing every night. And then they know it's time for bed and this is my long sleep. And this works all the way through toddlerhood. And trust me, toddlers are so routine driven. So if you can start this when they're very young, you can start a routine like this. In the first couple of weeks, sometimes it's really hard, but once they're like a month old, if you can start a routine like this, it's so, so helpful for them to know, okay, it's my bedtime now. And so combining that routine with the sleepy signs and the awake windows is so key to help your baby getting longer stretches of sleep overnight. Okay, so I'm going to open up for questions. So I'll take your questions in the next couple of minutes. I'll answer them over the next 15 minutes or so. I'm going to repeat the questions so you can all learn from what's being asked, okay? And just important to note, the only questions that we can cover are about general sleep practices. So I can't ask questions about individual sleep challenges just because I don't have enough background information to point you like in the right direction of what you should do. These require medical background and specific information that should be dealt with one-to-one during a sleep consultation or, with your healthcare provider, your family doctor, pediatrician, that sort of thing. So, so just general questions about things we've talked about. And if it's something we're going to talk about, I'll let you know. I'm so happy to answer questions now. Our baby, so Caitlin and George, our baby won't sleep in her bassinet at all. Any suggestions? Okay, this is a great question. And this is, it's really common and a struggle for many families. So I see the same question has come in again. So what I'll say is the things you can try. So swaddling is really helpful. And some people say, oh, my baby hates to be swaddled. But most babies don't mind if you swaddle them and then hold them and kind of rock them a little bit in the swaddle. They're okay. So the biggest thing that I encourage you to do is swaddle your baby at the end of their wake window when they're starting to show some sleepy signs, and then put them down before they fall asleep. And just help. You can rock them to sleep still, okay? But allow them to try to fall asleep while they're in their sleep space, because it's the transfer. They're falling asleep and so comfortable and warm on you, and then you're transferring them to this kind of foreign space, and it's different for them. And it's not that they don't like it, it's just that it's different, right? So if we can put them in that space and help them fall asleep while they're lying down in that space, it can be so helpful for them to not wake up on that transfer or like a few minutes later. So definitely give that a try. And same for encouraging them to sleep in the crib. So it's same for crib and bassinet. You've got to practice. It takes practice and it takes patience, but definitely putting them in there awake and allowing them to fall asleep in that space instead of falling asleep on you and transferring, that's where they are like having a hard time falling asleep in that space, because they're comfortable and cozy on you, which is fine and great. But then when you need to sleep too, right? And we can't sleep holding our baby on top of us. So just try putting them down in the crib or bassinet awake and help rock. And you can pick them up if they're really crying, pick them up and calm them down. That's okay. And so give that a try and really try sticking to those wake windows. And if you think when you're putting your baby down and so you're trying to put her down awake, you want to, if she's struggling and she's really crying, she may be overtired. So pull back the wake window to like I'm not sure how old your baby is, but let's say she's only a few weeks old. You really aim for like getting her in just before that hour of being awake, and that may really help you as well. Once baby's overtired, very hard to get them to kind of fall asleep on their own in the crib or bassinet. But yeah, follow those wake windows and try helping her fall asleep while she's lying down in the bassinet instead of transferring her. Okay. Heather, hi. I have a few questions. What is it about sleeping in our rooms that reduces SIDS? Awesome question. So Okay, first of all, you don't necessarily have to have your baby sleeping in your room. It's recommended, and how it helps with SIDS is it's something called co-regulation. So when your baby, there's research that shows when your baby is sleeping in the room beside you in their own sleep space, so they're in their bassinet or their crib and you're in your bed, but they're in close range to you, they can remain calm from sensing your nervous system. So it's called co-regulation. And so it helps reduce SIDS because they're calm and close to you. Having said that, if you're having a hard time, you say you have a small upstairs, lights would wake them. So what I would recommend is if you can get like a little nightlight or something to turn that on when you're going to bed, that can be really helpful. You can even if you have your baby in your room for like the first month or so, can be very, very helpful. Having said that, sometimes it's just not possible, and that's okay. But this is how it helps reduce SIDS. And yeah, so if you can like use the nightlight while you're trying to go to bed to try not to wake your baby up, but sometimes we can't keep them in our rooms, for the full 6 months, especially if they've outgrown their bassinet and they need to go into their crib. Some people don't have a big enough room to bring a crib also into their room. So sometimes baby has to go into their room before 6 months, and that's okay. Does a hot bath help sleep? Don't know if it was mentioned already. Yeah, so bath before bedtime is amazing. So usually newborns don't need a bath every day, just because it can really dry out their skin. But once they're a few months old, you can start doing a bath every day, usually, unless your baby's having like some sort of skin issues, which of course you can chat with your doctor about. But a bath before bed helps calm and relax baby, makes them feel clean, comfortable. And then over time, as I mentioned, it helps signal to their brain that it's time for the big sleep. So it actually can, I wouldn't necessarily do baths before naps, but bath before bedtime is really helpful part of a routine. Agata, should we wake up baby for feeding in the newborn stage? Awesome question. Very, very good. So here's what I'll say. Most babies lose weight after they're born. Basically, all babies lose weight after they're born. So usually what's recommended is they need to feed every 2 to 3 hours until they get back to their birth weight. So this is a conversation you should have with your doctor or pediatrician once your baby's born and you see how their weight gain is going. So once they're back to their birth weight, you don't usually need to wake them up for feeding overnight. During the day, we still want to have them make sure that they're eating every 2 to 3.5 hours. So if they've been napping and they haven't fed for 3.5 hours, we want to make sure we give them a feed. But overnight, once they're back to their birth weight and they're gaining weight well, usually we say, no, you don't need to wake them for a feed. You just feed them when they wake on their own. But it can be very baby specific. So it's always something that I recommend chatting with your pediatrician or your doctor about. And usually they'll tell you, after the first couple of weeks, once they've gained their weight back, they'll say, oh, okay, now if your baby's sleeping for longer than 3 hours, you can let them and just feed them when they wake on their own. But it's a very individual thing and something that I always recommend chatting with your doctor about. Okay, Heather, is TOG a weighted sleep sack? I've heard bad things about weighted sleep sacks. Okay, awesome question. So TOG is thermal overall grade. So TOG just means the thickness of your sleep sack, okay? So it's just a rating of how thick the material is. So for example, 0.5 is a very thin material, kind of like this blanket, whereas a 2.5 is a thicker material, but it's not weighted. Okay, so it's just the thickness of the material. And you're right, weighted sleep sacks are not safe. So American Academy of Pediatrics recommends not using weighted sleep sacks. So you may hear about weighted sleep sacks and you can buy them, but they're actually not recommended. And a weighted sleep sack is more like weight kind of like around the chest, and it's supposed to kind of mimic swaddling. So once you can't swaddle anymore, it's supposed to be this like extra sense of comfort for your baby so that It's like transitioning out of the swaddle. It's supposed to help that transition, but it's actually not recommended to use that. So the level of TOG is just the thickness of the material, but it's a thick, like a 2.5 TOG sleep sack is thick and warm, but it's not weighted. So there's a difference between a thick sleep sack and a weighted sleep sack. So I would not recommend buying a weighted sleep sack because they are, the American Academy of Pediatrics does not recommend that. They're saying that they're not safe. Okay. Jane, how to train baby to sleep through the night? So that's a big question. It's a good question. Around 5 months, sometimes a bit sooner. Some people like to do what's called sleep training. You may or may not have heard of that. There are many ways to kind of sleep train your baby. Typically, I would always recommend chatting with your doctor about if it's okay to be dropping night feeds, if you need to keep night feeds. What I will say is before 4 months, you can't really sleep train your baby. If they're having trouble falling asleep, they will need your help to get to sleep. It's developmentally normal for them to not necessarily to be able to fall asleep on their own. Normal for them to need your help to get to sleep. So how to sleep train your baby, if they're old enough, so around that 5 to 6 month mark, how you start would be you need to start encouraging independent sleep. So follow the wake windows, follow the sleepy cues, and try putting them down awake and allowing them to try to fall asleep on their own. If they've had some sort of sleep association where they're being fed to sleep or rocked to sleep, that can be difficult to change. So if you've been feeding to sleep and you're suddenly just, and you're deciding, okay, I'm going to start putting them down awake, that's a big change. And in order for them to communicate that change to us, they're probably going to cry. And so we need to be there to support them, because some people are okay to leave their babies to cry, but many and most people like to be there to support them. So there are many different methods. There are many different ways of doing it. And so I can't really get into like, this is exactly what you should do, because I need to know a lot more information about your family and your baby. But you can look up the different methods online and see. There's ones where you stay in the room and support and that sort of thing. So it's definitely doable around the 5 to 6 month mark. And I would recommend just kind of, you can look up some methods or you can reach out for help. If you're needing help, you can always reach out to us at the Baby Academy. What are your thoughts on a Montessori bed? So Montessori beds are great. What I would say is a couple of things. If you're doing a Montessori bed and your child is kind of less than 3, you want to make sure your room is clear of everything and outlets are covered, and like there's no way that they can pull drawers or cords or anything, okay, because they've got complete freedom. Typically, I'll tell you, I recommend keeping your baby in a crib until they're 3. And the reason for this is when they're younger than 3, most toddlers don't have the capacity to understand why they need to stay in their bed. And so many people transition to a Montessori bed or a toddler bed when the toddler is young, or maybe even less than a year. And people run into issues with sleep because the baby or the toddler doesn't understand why they need to stay there and why they need to sleep. And it's just like, it can be a lot of freedom. And that's okay if it's a safe space in the room, but it can cause a lot of sleep challenges. So just be cautious about that. If baby or toddler is sleeping really well, you may not want to make that change until they're closer to 3. But if you want to use a Montessori bed, it's okay. Just make sure there's like nothing else in the room. So basically the room is the crib because we want to make sure the space is really safe. We don't want them to be like opening doors and getting into things they shouldn't. It's a lot of freedom. So we just want to be very careful about that. Okay, Heather, can you swaddle with arms out? Good question. So there are some swaddles. I cannot remember the name of it, but there's a swaddle where your baby can actually move their hands up. So they have more room to move their arms up. It's called the dream swaddle or a zippity or something. I can't remember, but there is a swaddle where you can zip them in and they can move their arms up, because a lot of babies like to sleep on their back with their arms up like this. And so that's fine. That's safe. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily, like with a breathable blanket, if you're not tucking in their arms, there's not much of a point to it. So in that case, I would say that you can just put them in their sleeper and just put them with nothing in their crib, just in the sleeper, and they can sleep with their arms out like this. Jasmine, how do you feel about doing daytime naps in a wrap or carrier? This is awesome. Great. So absolutely, especially when your baby's young. Absolutely. This gives you a little bit more freedom if you need to get up and move around and get a couple things done, if you need to make yourself something to eat. Contact naps are great. And yes, you can do them sitting on the couch, that sort of thing, while you're awake. But you can also put your baby in a wrapper or carrier and have them sleeping on you in the wrapper carrier while you're up and about, or if you're sitting down. But absolutely, I think they're great. Justine, my baby is 5 months old and she rolls onto her tummy at night in her crib. Should I keep rolling her to her back, or she's okay to sleep on her tummy? Great question. This is great. She's okay. So if your baby is rolling and they roll onto their tummy, so I'll just go back for a second. So baby always goes into the crib or bassinet on their back, always, always, always. But if your baby rolls onto their tummy themselves, it's okay to leave them like that. Okay. So even at 3 months, for example, if your baby rolls onto their tummy on their own, it's okay. If they've got the strength to roll themselves onto their tummy, they've got the strength to turn their head. And not be kind of like face planted in the mattress, they'll turn their head to the side. So really great question. You don't need to keep rolling back over. Having said that, when babies start rolling, sometimes they accidentally roll over onto their tummy and they're not comfortable like that and they get upset. In that case, absolutely you can go and roll them back on their back. But definitely okay to leave baby on their tummy if they've rolled there themselves. Miriam, what would be a good sleep routine for a 1 to 2 month old baby? Awesome question. So again, I would start with a bath. You don't need to do the bath every night at this age. You could do it every other night. So a bath, and then sometimes you want to do like a little bit of lotion massage into pajamas. And then you're probably still swaddling at this age. So I would do into pajamas, and then you could do a feed and a little story. Swaddle, and then into the crib or bassinet, and see if you can put them in awake. Make sure you start your routine far enough advance of when they need to be asleep. Okay. So usually 30 to 40 minutes it will take you, especially with that feed, right? When they're little, it can take longer for the feed. So start early. And try lying her down awake, or him down awake, and you can help to sleep if you want. But that's a really good routine. And if you're not doing the bath, then you can just simply go up to the room and do lotion massage into pajamas, and then do the feed. And then after the feed, try doing a song or a story to break that up between the feed and going to sleep. And that can be really helpful. Audrey, I read that nighttime 10 to 12 hours for a 4-month-old. What if my baby sleeps for 9 hours at night? Naps should be timed max 2 hours. Also what I read online. What if he sleeps for longer than 2 hours? Should I wake him up or let him nap? Okay, so this is good question, big question. So sleep varies at this age still. So 9 hours is okay. It depends how long he's sleeping during the night. So you're right. A lot of people will say nap should be timed max 2 hours. This really depends on how night sleep is going for your baby. So some babies can handle longer than 2 hours. If he's only sleeping 9 hours at night, it sounds like I would probably not let him sleep longer than 2 hours during the day for each nap. Because then you might, yes, if you let him sleep longer in 3.5 hours, for example, then you might see his nighttime sleep decrease a bit. So I think you're in the right place. Okay. So I would probably, keep doing what you're doing, because it sounds like, it says 10 to 12 hours. I know those are the kind of recommendations, but 9 hours is great. And I assume you're doing at least a feed in there, maybe not. And if you're not and he's sleeping for 9 hours and then doing a feed, that's amazing. So I think, given that he's doing 9 hours at night, I would probably continue to wake him after 2 hours for a feed, and make sure he gets lots of nice good feeds in during the day. Emily, my baby doesn't want to sleep in the bassinet anymore. Yeah, not sure how old your baby is, but again, as I mentioned in the first question, try putting your baby in the bassinet while they're awake and helping them to sleep while they're lying in there. So hand on their chest or their belly, rocking, patting, help them to sleep that way. Often when we let them fall asleep on us and then we transfer them, it's that transfer that makes it seem like they don't want to sleep there. And most babies, of course, would prefer to sleep on their parents because it's warm and it's cozy. But most parents also need sleep themselves. And it's important for parents to get adequate sleep as well. So try that. Try the swaddling, putting baby down and allowing them to fall asleep in the bassinet. And that can be really helpful. Of course, supporting them to sleep if they're still quite young. Kaylee, my almost 7-month-old still wakes up 4 to 5 times a night to feed. I have tried to encourage more feeding during the day, but would appreciate some tips to lengthen the night sleep at this age. Okay, so this is a very specific question, so it's hard for me to really answer fully, but 4 to 5 times a night at 7 months old is a lot for feeding. So yes, encourage more feeding during the day, and just it may not be that he's waking up hungry. If he's feeding well during the day, these night wakes may not be because he's hungry. It may be more so we need to look at the schedule. So 7-month-old is likely taking 2 naps a day, maybe 3, probably 2, looking at 2 hours and 45 minutes to 3 hours awake during the day, and a bedtime between usually 6 and 7. So try that. It can also be helpful at this age to allow baby to try to learn to fall asleep on their own. That can be really helpful. So give those things a try. And if you need extra support, you can always reach out to us at the Baby Academy or chat with your doctor. Okay. So it looks like that is all the questions. So those were amazing questions, really, really great questions. And so there's lots more that I'm going to kind of teach and talk to you about. But first, we're going to take a quick break. So it's about 10 minutes to the hour. So let's come back in 5 minutes. So at 5 minutes to the hour, we'll come back. And so take a quick break. You can follow us on Instagram. Lots of great videos on there, not just baby sleep, but baby care and baby safety, all kinds of, prenatal and postpartum, all those types of things. So you can follow us there to get lots of great tips and information. And yeah, we'll see you back here in 5 minutes at 5 minutes to the hour. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Okay, so we've got lots of really great stuff to talk about. So I'm going to get going. So this is really important and usually wanted information. So we're going to talk about common sleep challenges and how to overcome them. So first, we're going to talk about daytime and nighttime confusion, also known as reverse cycling. So why does it happen? So in the womb, babies are used to sleeping in a dark and noisy environment. Their environment is always dark, so they have no daylight in there. It's always noisy from the swishing sound of blood flow to and from the placenta. Their environment is always the same, so they can sleep whenever they like, day and night. And when baby is born, it takes time for them to get used to daytime, which is bright, and nighttime, which is dark. Therefore, for this reason, it can take some time for them to figure out that we wake up during the day and we sleep during the night. So it's normal if you feel like your baby's staying up all night. It can be normal. Well, let's talk about what we can do about it. So what can you do? So as we said, expose baby to natural light during the day. So I mentioned this earlier. Daytime naps can be in your living room with the bright room, or they can be in their bedroom or your bedroom with keeping it bright. Having said this, sometimes once your baby is more than a few weeks old, they might need a darker space. But in the beginning, when we're trying to get daytime and nighttime sorted out, it can be really helpful to allow them to nap in a brighter space. Dark environment at nighttime. So nighttime is always dark. The darker the room, the better. So remember I said, if you close the door and turn off the light, you want to not be able to see your hand. So very dark at night. And as we said, limit daytime naps to 3.5 hours. So there was a question about nighttime sleep and wondering if they should let their baby sleep longer than 2 hours, because they had read that not to let their baby nap more than 2 hours. So first of all, most babies won't sleep for 3.5 hours during the day for one nap. Many babies, though, many babies do need to wake after 2 hours in order to have enough awake time to sleep a longer stretch overnight. So there are babies are all different. There are some babies that have low sleep needs, some have higher sleep needs. And so a lower sleep needs baby won't need a nap of 3.5 hours in the early days. That might start interfering with their overnight sleep. So it is baby dependent. And so make sure, kind of look at your baby and see their patterns. If they're taking really long naps, excessive of 2 hours during the day, and they're not sleeping well at night, then maybe we need to cap the naps at 2 hours. That can really help overnight sleep for sure. So did you notice how we learned nothing new here in these points? Because our routine from earlier solved these challenges already. So like we talked about, the daytime routines and the nighttime routines, that will help you sort out the daytime, nighttime confusion. Okay, so let's talk about early morning wake-ups. So why does this happen? So as your baby's circadian rhythm is not yet fully developed, any time can be wake-up time. So that circadian rhythm, remember, is your baby's kind of ability to tell the difference between daytime and nighttime. And so sometimes they'll wake up at like 4 a.m. and think, oh, daytime is starting. But we don't want to start their day at 4, because then they're always going to want to start their day at 4. And for most people, that's not what they want. So what do we do about this? So if they're waking on those early hours, you can feed them and see if they'll settle back to sleep. So most babies, of course, under 6 months still need a feed. And so if they're waking in those early hours, you can give them a feed, and often they will go back to sleep after that feed. You can give them a snuggle, try skin to skin. And so you can try all of those things. I'm just going to go back for a second. You can try all of those things and see if you can get them to go back to sleep. In the first few months, usually the feed will do the trick. Usually that will, if they're waking between 4 and 6, that will usually help them get back to sleep until at least past 6. So typically when I work with families that are struggling with this, we start by kind of saying like, morning doesn't need to start before 6 unless for some reason because of work or something in your family, morning has to begin before 6. But we usually say anything before 6 a.m. is an early morning wake up if it's between like 4 and 6. So, you know, all of, maybe they're waking because they're hungry, but as they get older, they may be waking because of scheduling during the day. Maybe they're sleeping too much during the day. Maybe they're not having enough awake time during the day. Maybe they're not getting enough calories during the day. So they're waking up genuinely hungry sometime between 4 and 6. So all of those things and scheduling, I find, can really and daytime sleep really impacts these early wake ups. So we often have to look at how many hours of total daytime sleep is my baby getting during the day. And if they're getting too much, then often they'll wake up early to start their day because remember I talked about sleep pressure in the beginning. If they haven't had enough awake time during the day and building that sleep pressure, then they're not going to have enough to stay asleep right through until 6 in the morning at least. Okay. So, and of course there are still feeds in there, but when they're waking between 4 and 6, especially around like the 6-month mark, and afterwards, it can feel frustrating. Like, okay, I just fed them at 3, so they shouldn't be awake at 5 because at 7 months, they should be able to go more than 2 hours in the night without eating, right? So usually at this point, it's a scheduling thing. So when they're new, it's usually a feed will solve it, and they go back to sleep. But once they get a bit older, usually it can be just something is off with the daytime schedule. So look at the number of naps they're taking. Maybe they're taking one too many naps, that sort of thing. Maybe they're taking, their last nap is really late in the day and it's pushing their bedtime really late. And then they're getting overtired because bedtime is very late. There are so many things that can influence early morning wake ups. And so if your baby is new, usually a feed will help them back to sleep. If they're a bit older, like 6 months plus, it's a good idea to kind of take a look at the schedule and look at their awake windows. And you can look at that chart that's at the beginning of the class to help guide you through that. So let's talk about short and unpredictable naps. So this is very common. So why does this happen? So newborns nap often and wake frequently as they need regular feeds. But the first, the timing can be irregular for the first few months. So it's normal for newborn babies to take short naps, sometimes like 20, 30 minutes. It's normal. What can we do about it? So encourage naps every 90 minutes if you're not recognizing sleepy cues. So remember we talked about the sleepy cues. So depending on the age of your baby, this 90-minute rule may or may not work. So you may need to do less. So like if your baby's very new, a few weeks old, 90 minutes may be too long. Around like 2 to 3 month mark, around 90 minutes. If you're not noticing sleepy cues, I would put them down, try to get them to nap, okay? Or do a contact nap, that sort of thing. And then if they're a bit older, 90 minutes might not be enough. So you might need to stretch. So really look at those wake windows and see, like, it's watching your baby and their sleepy signs along with kind of the clock. So if you're not seeing any sleep signs, maybe they need an extra 5 minutes, but try putting them down because often we can miss those signs sometimes, and then all of a sudden they're very overtired. So we want to follow those awake windows as much as we can in the sleepy cues. Now, having said that, follow them together because we can't just follow sleepy cues. I had somebody ask before, my baby is showing sleepy cues after only 30 minutes of being awake. So this is a really good example here. Only been awake for 30 minutes. Say they're 4 months old. Well, we know from looking at the wake window chart that a 4-month-old needs much more than 30 minutes awake to be able to take a good nap. So if your baby yawns after 30 minutes of being awake and they're 4 months old, we don't want to just put them down for a nap because very likely they won't sleep. Or if they do, it will be for such a short period of time. And then that can get frustrating. So babies, shortly after a baby has woken up, it's normal for them to yawn or maybe rub their eyes a little bit. We need to just get them doing things and switching up the room. Maybe you need to play some music or new toys or go out for a walk or that sort of thing. So switch it up. But Yeah, so just follow the awake windows, and even if you're at the end and you don't think they're showing many sleepy signs, try putting them down because they probably are tired, and that can help prevent a short nap. The other thing that I'll say is, if your baby takes a short nap, say 30 minutes, for example, that's generally the length of one sleep cycle. If you can do a couple things, you can give them like 10 or so minutes to see if they'll go back to sleep. If they're very little, you can just get them up and try to contact nap them, rock them back to sleep. You can do that, and so if they've had a short nap, try, if you can't extend it, try to keep them awake for another full wake window. So if they've had a 30-minute nap, don't just keep them up for an hour if they're 4 months old, for example, because they might seem tired after an hour, but if we put them down, they're just going to take another short nap because in that hour, they haven't had enough time to build the sleep pressure to take a longer nap. So we need to do a full wake window, even if they've done a short nap. And that can sometimes help correct short naps and help to lengthen them a little bit. So as I mentioned, you can use like a sling or a wrap, swaddles, snuggles to help extend the length of nap. And it's easy to do when they're newborns usually. If they have a short nap, you can pick them up and cuddle them and they'll usually fall right back asleep. It sometimes gets a bit harder as they get older. So if you give them that chance to get back to sleep and they don't after 10 or so minutes, don't get frustrated. Just get them up and start a new awake window and go from there. And then overtired babies can take shorter naps. You would think the opposite. So always try to put them down before they're overtired. So many people think, and people may tell you, oh, keep your baby up for a long time because then they'll sleep longer. But this is not true. This is the opposite. So the longer your baby is awake past what's kind of developmentally appropriate, they will get overtired. And when babies get overtired, they start to release hormones, stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. So if you think of yourself, if you're having some sort of flight or fight response or adrenaline rush, it would be really hard for you to go take a nap. So I would say, for example, like if you go for a run and then I said, okay, lie down for a nap now, you probably wouldn't be able to fall asleep. So it's the same for your baby. When your baby gets overtired, they're releasing those hormones and it makes it so hard for them to fall asleep. And eventually when they do fall asleep, usually after one sleep cycle or sometimes less, they'll wake up because their body has just got all that adrenaline flowing and it makes it so hard for them to sleep. So we want to make sure that we're getting them down before they get overtired. And that can be really helpful. And if you think your baby's overtired and they're used to doing naps in their crib, maybe for that nap, you want to do a contact nap, or, take them in the stroller or something like that. Can maybe help them. The extra comfort of being with you might help to extend that nap so they can catch up on some sleep. So let's talk about frequent nighttime waking. So this is very common. Why does it happen? So babies can wake 3 to 5 times during the night as their tummies are small and need to be refilled regularly. So this is so common for young babies. They need lots of feeds. In the newborn stages, like the first 3 months, every 2 to 3 hours is so normal. What can you do? If your baby wakes up crying, they may be hungry, okay, especially when they're little, uncomfortable, or need their diaper changed. In this case, quickly and quietly take care of their needs in a dimmed lighting. So maybe get a little night light, something that's very dim. And then once you take care of their needs, give them a good night kiss. It's part of the routine and put them back to sleep. So if you feel your baby is not hungry, uncomfortable, or in need of a diaper change, you can try soothing them by patting them gently on the chest or their tummy or saying a few reassuring words. Try not to constantly pick them up. So absolutely, if they're very, very upset, pick them up and calm them down. But oftentimes, if we're constantly picking up and putting down, they get very stimulated and it makes it very hard for them to fall back asleep. So not saying not to pick them up, you absolutely can, but just like watch how frequently you're doing it. It can be much more helpful to kind of leave them and be there with your hand patting or kind of gently rocking, helping them to fall back asleep in the crib or bassinet that way instead of constantly picking up and putting down. So that can help get them back to sleep if you know they're not hungry and they're awake. And then again, going back to what I mentioned at the beginning, allowing them to learn to fall asleep on their own is so helpful for this, so that when they do wake in the night, they're aware of their surroundings. They know their environment, and they're like, okay, yep, this is where I fell asleep and I'm safe here and this is good. And then they just drift back off to sleep. Okay. Whereas if you feed them to sleep or rock them to sleep and then you transfer them when they wake up, that environment is different and they're looking for that thing, the feeding or the rocking, for example, that helps them get to sleep. They're looking for that in order to get back to sleep. Nothing wrong with that, but if you are feeling exhausted from this and you can't sustain it because it's been months and you don't feel they're waking because they're hungry, then allowing them to learn to fall asleep on their own can be very, very helpful with helping them to sleep much longer through the night and having fewer night wakings. So that can be really helpful for night wakings. So let's talk about the 4-month sleep regression. So this kind of goes hand in hand with night wakings. It's really common. I like to call it a progression. Feels like the sleep is regressing, but actually your baby's development is progressing so much. Okay. So they're around this age, they're developing so much. So they're getting that circadian rhythm. So they finally got the daytime and nighttime figured out. They can tell the difference, and they're now switching to a more adult-like sleep cycle, so that their newborn with only 2 stages is now advancing. So there are 4 stages. So that's new. They're learning to roll. They're starting to babble. They're becoming aware of everything around them. And this is a big, big change for them, right? So their brains are very busy, and this can impact their sleep. So between their brain being really busy because they're learning so many new things, and that change in sleep cycles becoming a little bit, a bit harder, it can really feel like sleep is going backwards. So your 3-month-old, you think, oh, they're sleeping 8 hours overnight and this is great. And then 4 months happens and you're thinking, oh no, why are they waking every hour? And this happened to me with my first baby, and I had heard of the 4-month sleep regression, and I was like, oh no, this won't happen. But it did. And it happens to not every single baby, but pretty much all babies. It's very common. It's a very big time in their development. So some people call it the infamous 4-month sleep regression. So a sleep regression, as I mentioned, is when a baby or toddler experiences a change in their sleeping pattern. These regressions can last 2 to 6 weeks. So common signs of a regression are fighting naps or bedtime, difficulty falling asleep, taking shorter naps or skipping naps, frequent waking at night. So maybe, like I mentioned, your baby was sleeping for a longer period of time and now they're waking up every 2 hours, and fussing and crying. So these are all common signs of a regression, and the first one usually happens around 4 months. Sometimes it can be a bit sooner, closer to 3 months. Sometimes it can be a bit later, closer to 5 months. So research suggests that sleep regressions are responses to the physical and developmental changes babies experience in the first couple of years of life. So while many people see them as a negative experience, they're in fact opposite. So it can feel negative because they're awake more often, but it is positive in that your baby is developing and they're progressing in their development and moving forward. So let's talk about sleep regressions and why they're happening. So approximate timelines, we're going to talk about ages and why it's happening. So let's talk about 4 months first. So baby is developing an awareness. They're becoming aware of their environment. So not only are they learning to roll and babble and that sort of thing, they're becoming really aware of their environment. And so you might find that previously maybe they were feeding so easily, and then you notice something happens across the room and they turn their head and they pull away from the breast of the bottle and they're looking and they're very curious about what's going on. This is normal. They're developing awareness of the world around them, and it's great. But it can sometimes impact their sleep and their ability to get into a deep sleep. So in company with this comes the change in the sleep cycle that I mentioned. So they're no longer just transitioning between 2 stages of the cycle. There are now 4. And so they can transition through the 4 stages, but then when they go to the lighter stage of sleep at the end of the first sleep cycle, when they go to transition to a new sleep cycle, they struggle with that. And even a baby who has learned to fall asleep on their own, maybe before 4 months, can still struggle with this change. Okay. So it's big and it takes practice and it takes time. So the thing that's most helpful usually is to allow your baby to kind of fall asleep in their sleep space. And that doesn't mean just putting them there and leaving. You can be there to support them, to help them fall asleep, but allowing them to fall asleep in their crib, maybe still bassinet at this point, but allowing them that chance to know the environment they're falling asleep in, so that when they wake up, when they change through the sleep cycles, they'll know that environment, and so they're not, feeling anxious about being somewhere different, and they just drift back into another sleep cycle. So that's kind of the thing that can really, really help get you through this regression. I want to say a little bit more quickly. That can be really helpful. It can be hard. One of the hardest things at this age is they're practicing rolling, and often they'll roll onto their tummies and they're not comfortable there. And so they'll cry because they're uncomfortable. And so it's okay to go and move them and put them back on their back, for sure. But rolling can definitely impact sleep a lot. And so I would recommend that you do lots and lots of floor time. Allow them time on the floor. So there are those like activity centers and little chairs you can put them in, and different things. Those are fine, because you've got to get stuff done sometimes. But when you have the time, allow them time on the floor. This promotes, practice for rolling, and moving around. And then a couple of things, they can learn the skill faster. So then when they're into their crib and it's time for sleep, if they roll over, they're comfortable there because they've been practicing during the day and they're used to it. And then the other thing is allowing them to practice a lot during the day is great, because then when they go into the crib, they're less likely to maybe want to practice a lot in the crib. So you'll find a lot of babies like to practice these new skills in their cribs. So if we allow them to practice outside of the crib, when they go down for sleep, they might practice a little bit still, but more likely to kind of go to sleep easier. So that can be really, really helpful. Okay, so let's talk about 8 months. So the rest of the regressions they happen for sure, but maybe not less noticeable. You'll notice them, but the length of them might not be quite as long. So 8 months, motor skills are developing, crawling, maybe pulling to stand, object permanence. So learning that objects can reappear. So like peekaboo, that sort of thing. So when these things happen, again, brain is very busy. If they have already learned to sleep independently, usually you will notice this regression, but not it may not last very long. It may just be that their sleep is slightly impacted because they're practicing those skills in the crib, that like you might see them go up on their hands and rock back and forth, and they're practicing those skills. So sleep can be impacted a bit that way, but it's usually not a really, really long time that sleep is impacted for. And then 12 months, further motor skills are developing. At this point, we should watch for early transition signs, moving down to 1 nap. So typically, babies will drop to 1 nap a day, usually earliest around 13 months, 14, 15 months. But some babies do drop around 12 months. So if you're noticing troubles with sleep overnight that are new, it may be that they're getting too much sleep during the day. So we may have to increase their awake time, and they may drop to only taking 1 nap. 18 months, so development of language, chatting, separation anxiety is kicking in as baby learns to be an independent toddler. So this is huge. So I'll give you an example. Once we finally got Charlie sleeping well, he became a really good sleeper, and at bedtime I would put him into his crib, kiss him goodnight, and I would leave the room, and he wouldn't cry. He would just soothe himself to sleep, and he would fall asleep. So around 18 months, he started crying when I left the room again. And so this was new because previous to that, pretty consistently, he would not cry. He would just go right to sleep. So this was something new. So this is a bit of a regression. So I could see on the monitor, he would stand and he would cry as soon as I left the room. And so this is a separation anxiety issue, which can lead to a bit of a sleep regression. So what happens here? What do you do here? Because you don't want to leave your baby standing to cry. So what did I do? I would go and I would check in with him and tell him, that I was here, everything was okay, that, mommy would always be back, that sort of thing, reminding him that, I'm just in my own room because I'm going to get a sleep too. But I'm always going to come back and get you in the morning. Or, your partner is always going to come back and get your child in the morning. Like, just explain to them. And it lasts a little while, like it can last a couple of weeks, but generally they'll start going back to their old ways. If you just do those little check-ins with them and leave. Now, sometimes if you go in, it can make them more mad. So sometimes you have to, not go in too frequently. And then the other thing is this can also happen is if you go in because they're crying and then you decide you're going to sit with them until they fall asleep, that's okay. But just be prepared that they won't forget that and they will be expecting you to do that every night there on after. So, this actually happened to me not that long ago, even at 2 years old. I put my son in his crib and he started to cry. And so after a few minutes, I went in and I sat by the crib and I didn't stay there until he fell asleep, but I sat there until he was calmed down and then I left the room. And then he was okay. But the very next night when I put him in his crib, he pointed to the floor for me to sit beside his crib. He did not forget that I did that. And so it's okay to do it, but sometimes once you start it, they will expect it every night. So if you want to keep doing it, it's okay. But if you don't want to spend an hour sitting in your child's room waiting for them to fall asleep, then I recommend just checking in and leaving and just letting them know they're okay and then leave again. And by the way, the second night I didn't stay because I knew that it was going to become, many nights of me remaining in the room. So I just checked in with him and then I left and things were fine. So next is 24 months. So 2 years. So full on toddler independence, baby's learning to test boundaries. So big thing here. You're doing your same routine that you've been doing for over a year now, right? You're doing that routine. And then, so maybe it's like you at this point, you're brushing their teeth after the bath. So you do that, and then they have a little sip of water. And then at this age, an example here would be like, they're asking for more sips of water and they need just one more glass. And then, okay, so we get to the bedroom and then it's story time. And then usually we read 2 stories, but then at this age, it's like, okay, I want a 3rd story and a 4th story. And they try to delay bedtime and they keep trying to push it. And so you have to have boundaries here and you have to, maybe it's okay to read one more story, but that's it. And so you got to have boundaries here, or else they'll push you and push you and push you. And it's taking longer and longer bedtime. And then they're getting overtired. So they will have regressions around this age too. They can also become a little afraid of the dark at 2 years old, sometimes between 2 and 3. So sometimes a little kind of red nightlight. Red is a nice soft color. So that can be really helpful. As well. But usually those regressions are fairly short compared to the 4-month regression. So what can we do? Keep it consistent. When you have these regressions, keep baby's routine consistent, okay? Don't change things up. Be flexible and patient with the temporary sleeping patterns. It's normal and it's okay. Comfort them, but try to avoid creating bad habits. So like I mentioned, going in and sitting in my son's room, when I did that, then the next night he expected it. And so if you don't mind doing that, it's okay, but just know that they will come to expect it and then it can be hard to break that. So just keep that in mind. Alter your own sleep schedule. So especially in the younger months, around 4 months, if your baby's waking more frequently in the night, you might want to take an extra nap during the day, or you might want to go to bed earlier yourself. Baby may need extra feeds, especially when they're young. So that's okay. If you need to feed them and to help them get back to sleep when they're very young, that's okay. And ask for help. if you are feeling exhausted and like things are not sustainable because you're so tired, don't be afraid to ask for help. So ask for help of your partner, ask for help of your friends, family, even to be able to just go and take a shower or something like that. And then it's always okay to ask your doctor for help, other healthcare practitioners. Never be afraid to ask for help if you're exhausted and struggling. Okay, so I really, really hope that you are all feeling more confident about baby sleep. I hope this class provided you with a lot of information, answered some of your questions, and left you feeling confident. So if you are wanting to also feel confident about something else that's very important, it's our baby first aid class. So we offer an ultimate baby first aid class, and parents often tell us that their number one fear is not knowing what to do when their baby is in an emergency situation. Therefore, we have designed this 3-hour online class, and we review things like CPR, choking, burns, traumas, lacerations, so like cuts, that sort of thing, skin issues, other common baby issues. Typically, it's valued at $89. We have a special offer since you're joining this class. So if you book before midnight, you get 40% off coupon code Baby Safety 40. And this class will give you confidence in learning to apply life-saving skills to help your baby in case of emergencies. So it's convenient. You can do it live and online in 3 hours, just like this course. And you get a class recording. So in this class, you just get the slides emailed to you, but in the first aid class, we actually send you a recording of the instructor doing the class, so you can review it whenever you want. And again, special offer, there's a 40% off coupon code there. There's a little book now button at the top there. You can click there and book, or you can always book through our website. But I always recommend taking this class because as a nurse, when I had children come into hospital that required surgery for things like broken bones or children who came in with burns or that sort of thing, parents often told me, I'm really glad I had taken a first aid class and knew what to do while we were waiting for medical help, or, while we were trying to get to the hospital, that sort of thing. So it can sound scary, but it's really, really important. And it's great to feel confident in this area and have these skills that can be life-saving for your baby. So encourage you all to sign up for that class for sure. And here are some dates that are coming up. So they're on Saturdays from 9:30 to 12. You can see the dates here. There are a few places remaining in September, and then dates are here through November, and you can see these on our website as well. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for joining this class today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you all, answering your questions and giving you as much information as I can about baby sleep. I'll take some final questions in the last few minutes here. And thank you again for coming. So May, how can I see the recording? So there's not a recording of this class, but you are going to receive the slides. So you'll have all the information that's on the slides. Okay, let me just go back here. My 5-week-old loves to eat 2+ hours at a time and very often has longer wake windows. Is this okay? So 5 weeks old, congratulations, and still very little, Megan. So there's something called cluster feeding that you may have heard of, and it's very normal. So sometimes at this age at nighttime, babies love to eat for a long time, and it's normal and it's okay. So at 5 weeks old, probably they're still just doing an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes for wake time, and so that's normal. But as long as your baby is happy and content, it's all okay. But it can be normal for them to eat for quite a long period of time when they're this little, because it's called cluster feeding. And their tummies are growing and they need lots of milk. Thank you so much. Very, very happy to share this class with you guys. Zena, I was wondering why weighted sleep sacks are not recommended. So weighted sleep sacks. So American Pediatric Society doesn't recommend using weighted sleep sacks. It can present a higher risk for SIDS just because it's weighted, and if they're rolling in the sleep sack, it can cause it can potentially, it's probably not like super high risk, but it can be harder for them when they've got this weight on their chest. So So that's really why it puts them at higher risk for SIDS. Mo and Max, do you have any opinions or resources on dream feeds? Great question. So dream feeds can be great. And in case, if anyone's wondering what a dream feed is, so a dream feed is typically somewhere around like 10 or 11 p.m. And what it is your baby is already sleeping. And, one of the parents will go and feed baby while baby is asleep. So baby has not woken themselves for this feed. What happens is one of the parents initiates the feed. So you go to baby, pick up baby, and you would kind of get them, if mom's breastfeeding, would latch them, or if you're bottle feeding, pop the bottle in their mouth. And generally they don't really wake up. They just kind of feed in their sleep. Sometimes they wake up slightly, but so they take the feed, and then usually they're still asleep at the end of the feed, and you put them back in their bassinet or their crib. And so dream feeds can be great. Some babies do amazing with them. Some babies don't do well with them. Some babies, when you wake them up or pick them up for that dream feed, they wake and have a hard time going back to sleep. So just keep that in mind. It can work really well for some babies and not well for others. But the idea behind it is that feed right at the time that you're going to bed often helps get baby a bit of a longer stretch of sleep, and helps you get a bit of a longer stretch of sleep as well at that point in the night. Catherine, at what point do babies start rolling? So it varies. I've seen some babies start to try to roll around 8 weeks, very early. And it can take, some babies don't start rolling till 5 months, and that's okay too. So just watch for signs of rolling and unswaddle once they're starting. Carmel, do you change it up a bit when traveling in the first year? Is going away from the routine okay for short periods of time? Absolutely. People are different. All families are different. Some like to really stick to home. Some people like to continue traveling, and that's fine. The biggest thing I can recommend to you, yes, if you want to travel, absolutely, that's great. But try to stick to your baby's routine in terms of the awake windows and their routine before sleeping. So if you can, stick to like the bath and pajamas and feed and story into a dark room, maybe with some white noise if you're using that at home, that can be really helpful. Just replicate your at-home routine wherever you're traveling, especially for bedtime, and that can be really helpful. Carly, thank you for your time and expertise. You're so welcome. It's such a pleasure to teach these classes for you guys. Erica, thank you so much. Thank you. Is it safe not to swaddle? I'm scared of it, so I'd rather not. Absolutely. If you don't want to swaddle, it's fine. It can be helpful for young babies when they have that startle reflex when they're born, for the first couple of months. Sometimes that reflex can wake them up. But if you don't want to swaddle, you don't have to. It's okay. Katie, do we need to feed when baby wakes up from a nap and before it goes down for a nap? So you can do, feed your baby when your baby's hungry. Often that can mean feeding your baby. It's often, nice to get into a routine of feeding your baby when they wake up from a nap, and then have a little play time, and then it's nap time. And sometimes before that nap, they need a little extra feed. So you can do both, but kind of go by your baby's hunger cues. And then usually every 2 to 3.5 hours, most babies will want to eat. Caesar, what can I do to prevent flat head during naps / sleep cycles? What do you think of those pillows that prevent that? Okay, so no pillows, don't use them. Unless you've been instructed by like a physiotherapist to use something like while you're awake, when your baby's awake, when they're on the floor, that's different. But in terms of in the crib and bassinet, no pillows, nothing to prevent a flat head. It's for sleep, when baby is on their back, it's fine. Just make sure when they're awake, do lots of a nice tummy time, time where you're holding baby, where maybe they're on your chest, and not. So when they're awake, try to keep them off their head as much as possible. And of course, you can lie them down on one of those little play mat things for a little while, but just focus on making sure that they're turning head side to side and not just staying in one spot. But for sleep, it's fine. Have them on their back. You don't need to use pillows. It's more focusing on when they're awake, not to have them completely on their back in one spot for long periods of time. Audrey says, thank you. Thank you so much, Audrey. My baby sleeps extremely late, like 1 a.m. or 1:30, and won't wake up until 11 or 12 the next day. How can I change this? He's 6 months old. Okay, so this is a very specific question. So I can't give like super detailed advice, but it looks like they've got their schedule kind of a bit off. So it's like they're using that 1 a.m. to like 11 a.m. as their nighttime, and then 12 p.m. to 1 as daytime. So we just need to shift their schedule. So I would start by slowly each, like if your baby's not falling asleep till 1 or 1:30, slowly each day start waking them earlier, and then the naps will move earlier in the day and bedtime will move earlier. So even if you want to try like half an hour each day, so you're going to have to wake him up. So don't, if he goes to sleep at, if he goes to sleep at 1, let him sleep maybe the first morning until 10:30, and then that will start to bring bedtime backwards, and each day kind of wake him a little bit earlier. And that should help shift his schedule back to something more that represents true day and night. Do I repeat the sleep routine for all naps during the day or just at night? That's a really good question, actually. So I like to do a little nap time routine, and that can look like taking your baby for a diaper change, putting them into their swaddle or sleep sack, maybe singing a little song or a very short story, and then nap time. So your nap time routines are really good, and they can also signal to baby that it's time for sleep. And it also helps if your baby, especially as they get a bit older, if they're like on a mat playing with some toys, for example, you don't just want to take them and plunk them in their crib, because it's going to be really hard for them to go from that stimulating environment into their crib. They're probably going to cry. So if you can do that nice little short routine, like no more than 5 minutes, just diaper change, make sure they're comfy, into their sleep sack, or if they're really little, swaddle them, and then a little story or a song, and then it's time for sleep. That's an awesome nap time routine. No need to do the bath or anything like that before naps, just at bedtime. But yeah, sleep routine before naps is great. That's a great question. Catherine, I have heard that babies' heads can get flat from always sleeping on their back. Is this true? And what age do we need to roll them on their sides alternatively? Okay, so the thing here is that having your baby sleep on their back, that's not necessarily fully causing the flat head. So as I mentioned, somebody asked a question about this just a minute ago, but when they're awake, focus on not having them on their back and not having them on their head. That will help prevent, and make sure that you're having them look to different directions. And if they're in their crib or bassinet and their head is tilted to the side, each sleep or every other night, make sure maybe their head is tilted to the opposite side and that sort of thing. We don't ever roll them on their sides to try to prevent a flat head. Okay. So always in for sleep, always on their back. And then to prevent the flat head when they're awake, focus on doing things that keep them off of their head. Okay, last question is from Emily. My baby is 4 months old and she started to cry more before sleep. Now it makes sense why. Yeah, so it's probably the 4-month sleep regression, and it can be a really tough time. Focus on the wake windows and focus on her sleep cues. Make sure she's not getting overtired. And if you can work on independent sleep, at this age, you may still have to help her to sleep a little bit, but those things can really, really help. And sometimes, you need to provide her a little bit more comfort because she is going through that little regression, and she may be finding sleep a bit harder because of the sleep cycles, and also because her brain is busy learning all of these new things. So I hope the information I gave you about the 4-month regression is helpful and can help you get through it. So that was the last question. So thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with all of you and presenting all of this information to you. And it was great. You guys had really awesome questions. I was so happy to answer those. And congratulations to you all, whether you're expecting or your baby's already here. It's an exciting time, and I wish all of you the best, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.